resisted rebellion and civil war for 13 years, fled the country. There were celebrations on the streets, reactions from world leaders, and an air of tension and uncertainty. What happens next? Is the Syrian war over? Who is in charge? What happens to the refugees? What do we know about the man and the group that led this rebel offensive? Why is Assad's ouster a win for Turkish President Erdogan? Why is it a loss for Russian President Putin and the regime in Iran? And what does it mean for India? Also, how did Assad go from being a doctor to a dictator? Tonight, we'll bring you the images, updates, and analysis of the biggest story in the world right now. Also tracking Donald Trump's Paris visit, where he sought China's help to end the war in Ukraine and enlisted Jill Biden to sell his perfume. We'll explain. India's Foreign Secretary visited Dhaka, met Yunus and team. We'll tell you what happened there. Why 200 people were killed in Haiti in what's being called a voodoo massacre. Why Jack Ma has resurfaced, and what does it say about China's new campaign to woo investors? What does it take to be a chess champion? And who needs a human washing machine powered by artificial intelligence? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. South Korean president banned from leaving the country. It comes less than a week after he briefly imposed martial law. On Saturday, Yoon Suk-yeol narrowly survived an impeachment motion in parliament. He is the first sitting South Korean president to face such a travel ban. China probes US chip giant Nvidia. Beijing accuses the AI chip maker of violating its anti-monopoly laws. Shares in Nvidia dropped after China announced its investigation. In recent weeks, Beijing and Washington have clashed over exports of key chip-making technology in which Nvidia is a major player. A major ethnic rebel group in Myanmar sends its delegation to China. They want to hold talks with Xi Jinping's government. This comes as Beijing looks to end fighting along its southern border. In 2021, the junta seized power in Myanmar. China is its most important ally. Sanjay Malhotra appointed the new governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He is the current revenue secretary. He will take charge from Wednesday for 3 years. Malhotra replaces Shaktikanta Das, whose tenure ends tomorrow. And Ghana's former president John Mahama wins a historic comeback election. He defeats the incumbent vice president. Mahama was president from 2012 to 2017. This was his third attempt to reclaim the top post. He had fallen short in the 2016 and the 2020 elections.
To the question of what comes next. The United States.
"13 years. That's how long Bashar al-Assad resisted the Syrian rebels. He clung on against all odds, but in 13 days, his resistance crumbled. As the rebels closed in on Damascus, Assad fled the country, thus ending 24 years of his rule and 53 years of his family's rule. It's indeed the start of a new chapter in Syria. We'll discuss that in detail, but first, how did Damascus fall? When we last spoke, the rebels were in Hama, around 200 kilometers from the capital. After taking the city of Hama, they marched towards Homs. It's a city north of Damascus, sort of like a gateway to the Syrian capital. The regime soldiers did not put up much of a fight. They were underpaid and under-equipped, so most of them simply surrendered. A few even joined the rebel ranks. Soon celebrations broke out in Homs. The rebels fired their guns into the air. Statues and portraits of Assad and his family were attacked. Take a look. Damascus was captured on Saturday. By then, the picture was becoming clear. The rebel leader released a message on social media. His name is Mohammed al-Julani. He leads an Islamist rebel group called HTS, the same group that led this offensive. Al-Jalali set his eyes on Damascus after Homs. Rebel forces said that they had encircled the capital city of Syria. The stage was set for a final standoff, but it wasn't even needed. Because in Damascus, the sentiment was firmly anti-Assad. The city was in no mood to fight, so the soldiers simply surrendered. Late on Saturday, the rebels began entering the capital. Around the same time, Assad hopped on his plane and fled to Russia. By morning, the takeover was complete. The rebels appeared in front of Syrian state television. They declared that Damascus had fallen. So who's in charge now? On paper, the Prime Minister of Syria, he is the one who's in charge. The rebels have asked him to keep running the government. Once a transition plan is ready, he will step aside. That's the assumption right now. But the immediate worry is stability, getting a grip on things in Damascus and beyond. That's what they need to do first. On Sunday, rebel fighters stormed Assad's presidential palace. They looted his belongings and destroyed his family portraits. They also found his garage. It had Ferraris, Aston Martins, Bentleys and Rolls Royces. Take a look.
نحن ما عنا بدبي نحن بكراج الحمار نحن ما عنا بدبي.
The rebels also went for the prisons. Assad had jailed a lot of critics in the last decade. Reports say around 100,000 people have disappeared or been jailed since 2011. The rebels tried to free them. One of their main targets was the Sednaya prison. It's located on the outskirts of Damascus. It's often called the human slaughterhouse. That's how brutal it is. The rebels took control of this facility and they released the prisoners. Some of them could be seen roaming the streets later.
الله أكبر الله أكبر مساجين يحيى الله أكبر سقط النظام.
Most Syrians are thrilled by Assad's ouster, and it's obvious why. Around 70% of the country lives in poverty, around 26% have no jobs, and 30% are displaced. There is no freedom, no livelihood, and no peace. So Syrians were relieved by Sunday's news. We saw celebrations across the country. So Syrians are thrilled. What about the rest of the world? US President Joe Biden hailed Assad's ouster. He called it a fundamental act of justice. Europe and Britain are also on the same page. They have welcomed the regime change in Damascus. So has Turkey. President Erdogan says there is a new political reality in Syria. And the Arab nations? Same thing. Assad was an ally of the Iranian regime. So the Arab capitals are fine with his ouster. But all these countries are worried about one question. What happens next? Is the civil war truly over? Well, that depends on three factors. For starters, the Syrian rebels are not one homogeneous group. There are different tribes, different religious sects, and different ideologies. They did unite to oust Bashar al-Assad, but will they stick together during the transition, or will they bicker over power sharing? That's one question. Secondly, what role will the Kurds play? The Kurdish groups control most of northeast Syria. They don't have a good relationship with Islamist rebels. So will the Kurds be sidelined? And if so, will they fight back? Which brings us to the final factor, the nature of future regime. Assad's rule was largely secular. But the rebels are hardcore Islamists. He mentioned HTS and Al-Julani. Al-Julani used to fight for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. He may talk about tolerance now, but let's see how he rules if he comes to power. The fact is, it's too early to predict anything. We've seen similar scenes in countries like Afghanistan, Iraq and Libya. Long-time regimes and rulers toppled in lightning offensives. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have consolidated power, so the war is over. In Iraq, there is no political stability, and in Libya, there is still a civil war. So it's a question of which way Syria goes. Right now, there is a political vacuum in the country. The key is to fill that rapidly, to chart a quick roadmap for the future. If not, and the world has bad memories from instability in Syria. Last time it led to the rise of ISIS. They set up a caliphate in Iraq, in Syria and Iraq. They plotted terror attacks across the world. That remains the biggest worry for the world right now, a repeat of that chaos. Plus, Syria's location is very important. It borders Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Iraq. It is also home to foreign forces from Russia, from Iran, and from the US. So what happens there affects all these countries. And what about India? Well, New Delhi has called for unity in Syria. It also demanded a peaceful and inclusive political process. But frankly, this is not ideal for India. Bashar al-Assad was a long-time partner of New Delhi. He supported India's positions on Kashmir, including the 2019 decision to rescind the special status, to scrap Article 370. The next regime in Damascus may not be so understanding. India also has commercial interests in Syria. In 2009, it agreed to fund a thermal power plant. A loan of $240 million was promised. Some Indian companies are also involved in the oil industry. Combined investments are about $350 million. As I said, India would have liked a political settlement, one where Assad was still involved. But there isn't enough at stake to keep New Delhi awake at night. Now, I know it's celebration time in Damascus, but it should also be a period of caution because uncertainty is looming over Syria. Only time will tell if this revolution succeeds. So the rebels have won in Syria. But now let's zoom out a bit and look at the other big winner. That is Turkey. Their president Recep Tayyip Erdogan has claimed a major victory. For years he's been backing the Syrian rebels, and now that they've succeeded, he stands to gain.
Türkiye olarak bizim temennimiz
Our wish as Turkey is for our neighbor Syria to attain the peace and tranquility it has been longing for 13 years.
Erdogan made that speech on Saturday as Damascus was falling and Assad was fleeing. Erdogan was addressing a crowd in the city of Gaziantep. It's near the border with Syria. It is home to hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees. Erdogan was clearly pandering to the crowd, and they probably did not mind because Assad's fall was a victory for both these parties, the Syrian refugees and the Turkish president. Throughout the civil war, Turkey opposed Assad's regime. It was reportedly personal. Erdogan and Assad used to be friends. They even went on a family holiday together once. But things turned sour in 2011. When the Syrian civil war began, reports say that Erdogan made a personal appeal to Bashar al-Assad to go easy on the rebels. But Assad ignored him and unleashed a bloody crackdown. Erdogan is said to have taken this personally. He was furious that his supposed friend would shun his advice thus. So he began to publicly oppose the Syrian regime and started supporting rebel groups, most notably a group called the Syrian National Army that controls vast swathes of northern Syria. They were part of the latest offensive, the one that brought Assad down. They fought alongside the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Now, the HTS is a designated terrorist group in Turkey, so Ankara could not support them overtly, but they did support them with aid and supplies. Look at the HTS stronghold. It's the region of Idlib, and Idlib borders Turkey. So by keeping these supply lines open, Erdogan gave them tacit support, and now their victory is his victory.
kapımızı açarken de
The Damascus regime never realized the value of the hand Turkey extended. It did not understand what it meant.
daima buydu.
You heard what he said. Assad never valued the hand Turkey extended. That happened last year. Erdogan reached out to Assad. It was a pivotal point in the war. Assad could have negotiated with Ankara, perhaps cut off the rebel supply lines. But he did not respond to Erdogan's overtures. Perhaps that was the beginning of his downfall. Reports say the rebels then reached out to Ankara. They showed Turkey their plans and asked for a free hand. And it seems Turkey agreed. And the results are there for the world to see.
Bundan sonraki süreçte farklı etnik ve
We will continue our work to ensure the voluntary and safe return of Syrians and for the reconstruction of the country. Turkey, which gave a hand to its Syrian brothers in their difficult days, will also be with them in the new chapter that opened in Damascus.
Suriye görmek istiyoruz.
Cut through the diplomatic jargon. What do you hear? Point number one, Syrian refugees are going to leave Turkey. It is already happening. In fact, Syrian refugees started gathering at border checkpoints last night. They want to go home. And this will be a massive relief for Erdogan. His country's economy is not doing well. The refugees were seen as an added burden. So their departure will relieve some of the pressure. Point number two, Ankara will help with reconstruction, which means big money for the Turkish construction industry. Incidentally, Erdogan has ties to the construction sector, so he might just make a pretty penny during the reconstruction activities. And finally, point number three, Turkey plans to, and I'm quoting, Turkey plans to be with the Syrians during this new chapter. Basically, they want to have a say in what happens in Damascus. Considering their long-term support, this is entirely possible. And this is Erdogan's prize. He is the winner. Now let's turn to the losers. Apart from Assad, obviously, there are two big ones, two big losers, Russia and Iran. We'll start with Russia. Putin came to Assad's aid in 2015 at the height of the Syrian civil war. He rescued the regime. Russia has military bases in Syria. For years, they conducted airstrikes on the rebels, but this time, Moscow could not muster enough forces. It was busy fighting Ukraine. Its forces were stretched. The most that Russia could do was offer asylum, so Assad and his family have fled to Russia. Moscow says it does not betray its friends, but it has accepted the regime change. This was the Syrian embassy in Russia, in Moscow. They were raising Syria's new flag, the opposition flag. Even Assad's new home understands that his reign is over. And what about the Russian bases in Syria? What happens to them? Well, Moscow does not know yet. The Kremlin spokesperson said it was premature to talk about them. The Russian forces there are reportedly taking precautions in case they're attacked. The world sees this as a Russian loss, at the very least, a major loss of face. In fact, look at this post from Donald Trump, the next US president. Trump says, and I'm quoting, "They lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine, where close to 600,000 Russian soldiers lay wounded or dead." Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now, one because of Ukraine and a bad economy, the other because of Israel and its fighting success. That brings me to the next big loser, Iran. Tehran has lost a major ally in the region. They supported Assad's regime with a network of proxies in West Asia, proxies like the Lebanon-based Hezbollah. These were Assad's elite boots on the ground, the troops who pushed the rebels back. But Hezbollah has been severely weakened due to the war with Israel. They could not help Assad this time around. Neither could other Iranian proxies.
No request for assistance was ever made to us. It was fundamentally the responsibility of the Syrian army. We did not consider it our duty, nor did the Syrian government assign us any role, as it was an internal Syrian matter, its relationship with its own opposition groups and its own people.
So Iran is trying to play it cool, saying it wasn't even asked for help this time, and that the blame for Assad's fall lies with the Syrian army. But the Syrian people aren't buying it. They stormed the Iranian embassy in Damascus yesterday, leaving a trail of destruction behind. By the looks of it, Iran has lost an ally, and this weakens its position in West Asia. Syria gave Iran a land corridor all the way to Lebanon, to the borders of Israel. Now Tehran will have to deal with potentially hostile forces in between. The land corridor is shut. And so is Iran's ability to project power. And Iran's proxies will be watching all of this. They will take note. They see that Tehran could not defend a key ally. They may start doubting Iran's ability to support them. So Iran has lost face, and so has Russia. It wasn't a direct military blow to either, but a blow to their prestige. Let's see how they recover from this. Two names come up repeatedly in this story. HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, led by Abu Mohammed al-Julani. So who is Julani? Why did he form the HTS? And will he rule Syria now? First things first, Abu Mohammed al-Julani is not even his real name. It's Ahmad Hussein al-Shara. He is Syrian, but was born in Riyadh in 1982. That's where his father worked as an oil engineer. The family went back to Syria in 1989. They settled near Damascus. Not very much is known about his childhood or what he did in Syria. But we know that in the year 2003, Julani moved to Iraq. It was when the United States invaded Iraq, Julani joined the al-Qaeda to resist the US invasion. In 2006, he was arrested by the American forces and imprisoned at Camp Bucca. That's where he met Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of the Islamic State. In 2011, Baghdadi sent Julani to Syria. The goal was to set up the al-Nusra Front. By 2012, it became a big fighting force in the country, with links to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. In 2013, Baghdadi made a sudden announcement. He was cutting ties with the al-Qaeda and expanding into Syria. The plan was to form the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or what's popularly known as ISIS. It included taking over the al-Nusra Front. But Julani did not like this plan, so he resisted and pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda. Julani did not want a global caliphate. What he wanted was power within Syria's borders, so that's what he focused on. In 2013, al-Nusra became al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate, but that did not help. The Syrian war was raging. Rebel factions were all fighting for power, and the al-Qaeda did not do much. That gave al-Nusra very little leverage. So in 2016, Julani broke up with the al-Qaeda. He rebranded his group. It was first called Jabhat Fateh al-Sham. That name did not stick. In 2017, it became the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, aka the HTS. And their goal was simple, to free Syria from the Assad regime. Soon HTS became a dominant force in Idlib. It's a northwestern city home to some 4 million people. The HTS controlled it. They even established a civilian front called the Salvation Government, or the SG. The SG ruled like a state. They had a prime minister and government departments. Julani too went through an image makeover. He wanted to shed the al-Qaeda association. So he organized events, talked to the public, even arranged some disaster relief. And now that they have taken over Syria, all that image building will help. The HTS can use it to legitimize its rule. Although there are 3 problems with this. Number 1, the HTS is a designated terrorist organization because of their past association with the al-Qaeda. The US, the UK and the United Nations, all of them see the HTS as a terrorist group. In fact, Julani has a bounty on his head, an award of $10 million for his whereabouts. The HTS will want to come to power in Syria, and that means countries will need to talk to them. So the terrorist past won't help. The jihadist tag is a liability. Although some countries are wondering if they should drop it now. The UK, for instance, is looking at removing it from the terror list, removing this group. And other countries could follow, else the HTS could end up becoming another Taliban. Problem number 2, their Islamic dreams. They want to establish a state according to their own interpretation of Islamic law. It's not clear what that means. What is their interpretation of the law? Syria has a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society. Yes, there are Shias and Sunnis, but there are also Christians, Druze and others. Assad and his father cracked down on Islamist groups. They kept them at bay. Now, the HTS has also issued assurances, and they've said that religious and ethnic minorities will be protected in the country. But we'll have to wait and see. And problem number 3 is their track record. They accuse Assad of being authoritarian, but look at their own record. The HTS has done the same, imprisoning critics in Idlib, brutal crackdowns and human rights abuses. Also, they may have led this offensive, but they had support from many other rebel groups that will now want their pound of flesh. So where does that leave Syria? Can a group with such a troubled past earn legitimacy both at home and abroad? As of now, the questions outnumber the answers. The future of Syria remains uncertain. Julani could be Syria's new ruler, but let's talk about the old one for the moment, Bashar al-Assad. His rise to power was unexpected. Assad was a doctor in the UK, leading a quiet life. But then his brother died, and that propelled him into power. His rule began with a fresh wave of modernity, but it continued only with brutal crackdown. The Assad family ruled Syria for more than 50 years, and even the strongest foundations crumble when the tide turns. For years, Bashar al-Assad defied the odds. In the end, his grip slipped. And his legacy? A nation scarred by war, division and loss. Our next report tells you how a doctor became a dictator.
It was 21st January 1994. Bashar al-Assad was on his way to the Damascus airport. He was driving really fast. He collided with a barrier. The car crashed and he died immediately. This accident changed the life of his brother Bashar al-Assad. Bashar was the golden child of the Assad dynasty. Once he was gone, it was Bashar al-Assad's throne. He may never have wanted it, but there was no choice. Bashar al-Assad was born in 1965, the third child of Anisa Makhlouf and Hafez al-Assad. His father was the ruler of Syria. Bashar was unlike his siblings. He was quiet and reserved. He was not interested in politics. In 1988, Assad graduated from medical school. He started working as an army doctor. In 1992, he settled in the United Kingdom. He was doing his postgraduate training in ophthalmology. He was described as geeky by his classmates. His boss called him humble. He lived a comfortable life in London. His path seemed destined for quiet professionalism and not the labyrinth of Syrian politics. But his brother's death changed it all. Hafez al-Assad had groomed Bashar to be his successor. He was charismatic and a people's person. But with him gone, Bashar was suddenly thrust into the role of the heir apparent. It's not something he wanted, but it's not an order he could refuse. So Bashar al-Assad left his job and moved back to Damascus. The next 6.5 years were all about training him. Bashar entered the military academy. He moved up the army ranks. It was all a bid to legitimize his rule. He learnt the tricks of the trade from the master himself. And when Hafez al-Assad died in 2000, it was time to put them to use. The initial reaction to Bashar al-Assad becoming president was lackluster. Critics said he was incompetent, that he would end up squandering his father's gains. The first few years were a welcome change. Assad wanted to show that he was different, modern and opening Syria to the world. His initial plan was economic change, replacing state-owned monopolies and embracing the free market. His wife, Asma al-Assad, a former investment banker, helped with that. By 2011, this carefully crafted image fell apart. The Arab Spring reached Syria. Protests broke out against Assad and his rule. It started out small, but soon snowballed into a bigger movement. Syrians wanted a revolution, but they were on the receiving end of a brutal crackdown. Thus began a full-blown civil war. It went on for nearly 14 years. Assad held on to power, but he did so using the most oppressive techniques, including reportedly unleashing chemical weapons against his own people. Syria soon became a battleground. Several regional and international powers started to get involved, as did the jihadists. Assad suffered a few setbacks, but he had massive military backing from Russia and Iran. By the end of it all, Assad even managed to win back nearly 2/3 of Syria's territory. However, the war itself destroyed Syria. Over 500,000 people were killed, millions displaced. It was the worst refugee crisis in the world. All of this made Assad a global pariah. By 2020, it looked like the worst was over. A truce was declared in March of that year. In 2021, Assad was re-elected for a fourth term with over 95% of the votes. By 2023, he was back in Arab diplomacy. Syria joined the Arab League. Assad took part in his first summit for more than a decade. But what kept him afloat would ultimately become the very force that unraveled him. Assad depended on external help to remain in power, mainly Russia and Iran. Moscow was busy and stretched with the Ukraine war. Iran had bigger problems in West Asia with its axis of resistance under attack. So, once they looked away, Syrian rebel groups had the perfect opportunity. They mounted a lightning offensive and Assad's army could do nothing. He vowed to crush the rebels, but in the end, he had to flee, ending his family's half-a-century-long grip on Syria. Bashar al-Assad's story is one of reluctant power, a man who never wanted the throne, but once got it, he clung to it with everything he had. His rule ended just as it began, with a sudden twist of fate, leaving Syria to once again reimagine its future.
Outgoing US President Joe Biden said that the sudden collapse of the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad is a fundamental act of justice after decades of repression. Now, but it was also a moment of risk and uncertainty for the Middle East, is the statement that is coming in from Joe Biden. Let's listen into what exactly he had to say.
13 years of civil war in Syria, more than half a century of brutal authoritarian rule by Bashar al-Assad and his father before him. Rebel forces have forced Assad to resign his office and flee the country. We're not sure where he is, but there's word that he's in Moscow. At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks. These past few days have been historic. And, it's in the days ahead that will determine the future of this country. And we intend to approach them with strength, wisdom, and resolve. So thank you very much. God bless America, and God protect our troops. Thank you.
Akansha, we just heard the US President Joe Biden. Of course, he is outlining a multi-pronged approach when it comes to maintaining stability in Syria. But given the fact how the situation is right now, how much feasible is it to maintain stability and counter the ISIS that is there?
Right. Sharon, he's saying that first they will be engaging with Syrian groups, and that I think is going to be a very crucial point to begin with. He's also talked about how they, including within the process that's led by the United Nations to establish the transition. And perhaps you can expect if the United States strike, that sort of rapport is now needed with the rebel forces to explain to them what is expected out of them and how they should be going about it. They will, US also ensure.
India's Foreign Secretary was in Dhaka today. It was a high-stakes diplomatic mission, one with multiple objectives. He had to attempt a reset with Bangladesh, he had to draw some red lines, and he had to cool down the temperatures. And all of this in less than 24 hours. So did he do it? Well, for starters, there are no controversial headlines yet. The talks were frank and cordial. Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri had multiple meetings in Dhaka. He met Interim Chief Mohammed Yunus. He also met the Foreign Minister and the Foreign Secretary. And the agenda? India highlighted three main talking points. First, India's commitment to the people of Bangladesh. Second, a call to deepen cooperation. And third, concerns about the state of minorities, especially the attacks on religious and cultural centers. Listen in.
I emphasized
that India desires a positive, constructive and mutually beneficial relationship with Bangladesh. We have always seen in the past and we continue to see in the future this relationship as a people-centric and people-oriented relationship. At the same time, we also had the opportunity to discuss certain recent developments and issues, and I conveyed our concerns, including those related to the safety and welfare of minorities.
New Delhi kept highlighting the role of people on both sides. In fact, let me quote from the Indian statement. Foreign Secretary emphasized that people are the main stakeholders in India-Bangladesh relations and noted that India's development cooperation and multifaceted engagements are all geared towards the benefit of the people of Bangladesh. So the message is quite clear. India's commitment is to the people of Bangladesh, not one particular leader, not one particular regime, but the people. This statement must be seen in context. A lot of Bangladeshi leaders have accused India of favoritism, of siding only with Sheikh Hasina, but New Delhi says that is not the case. Our commitment is to the people. And speaking of Sheikh Hasina, did her stay in India come up during the talks? The Indian statement does not mention Hasina at all, but Dhaka did raise the issue. And the Indian Foreign Secretary tried to clarify his position. He said New Delhi will work with the government of the day. Hasina's stay has no bearing on relations. That's what Vikram Misri told his counterpart. But Dhaka was not satisfied. They asked the Foreign Secretary to convey a message to Hasina that her statements from New Delhi are not welcome, to which the Indian diplomat did not say much. He simply apparently noted it. Now, just to be clear, this is Bangladesh's version of what happened. The Indian statement, like I said, does not mention Sheikh Hasina at all. What it does mention, though, is minority rights. New Delhi did not shy away from raising its concerns. The Foreign Secretary highlighted the attacks on temples and cultural centers. Listen to Dhaka's response.
We brought to India's attention the misinformation and false reports in Indian media about the alleged mistreatment of minorities. We also highlighted that all religions in Bangladesh are practiced freely and there is no room for confusion or misrepresentation. Furthermore, we underscored that this is an internal matter for Bangladesh and that foreign comments on our internal issues are inappropriate.
Dhaka is still not admitting the problem. They're blaming Indian media. They also say that it's our internal matter, so do not comment on it. And that sums up Vikram Misri's trip to Dhaka. Both sides were certainly frank. They openly aired their concerns. They also agreed that ties should improve. But we have no roadmap on how to do it, because that depends on political will, which is missing in Dhaka. They have cancelled an important connectivity deal with India, one that could have increased internet speeds in India's northeast. The deal was signed in 2023. Mohammed Yunus has cancelled it. You see, India's northeast gets internet through a long route. First, submarine cables from Singapore to Chennai, then domestic fiber cables from Chennai to the northeast. This long route slows the internet. Plus, the cables pass through rough terrain, so repairs are a nightmare, which is why Bangladesh entered the picture. The plan was for Bangladeshi companies to supply internet bandwidth. Instead of Chennai, the cables would go via Bangladesh. Shorter distance, greater speed. That was the idea. Then why is Dhaka making a U-turn? Apparently, they feel it will undermine their potential to become a regional internet hub. Dhaka wants to supply bandwidth to other players as well, like Myanmar and northwest China. But they say that the 2023 deal with India will not permit that, hence the U-turn. Frankly, it sounds like a petty move, much like blaming your neighbor for flash floods. The fact is, Dhaka must engage in good faith. India has made its commitments and concerns clear. It's time for Mohammed Yunus to be clear about his. Now let's look at another diplomatic display, one that could reshape Europe. Donald Trump just paid a visit to France and dropped another bombshell. He wants China's help to end the war in Ukraine. So what exactly is he proposing, and what was he doing in France in the first place? Let me answer the second question first. Trump was in Paris for the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. The cathedral was gutted by a fire in 2019. It was repaired over the last few years and finally reopened on Saturday. French President Emmanuel Macron held a grand ceremony for it. He invited leaders from all over the world, including Donald Trump, who is still technically a private citizen. He hasn't taken office yet, but Macron invited him because talking to Trump was important as soon as possible. So Trump was given a grand welcome at the Élysée Palace in Paris. That's the French presidential palace. Macron and Trump hugged and shook hands multiple times, and quite fiercely. It's an old habit of theirs. They did this during Trump's last presidency as well. It seems some things never change.
President, I just say it's a great honor for French people to welcome you 5 years later. And you were at that time President, first time, and I remember the solidarity and your immediate reaction. So, welcome back again.
Thank you
very much. We are very happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor to be here. We had a good time together, and we had a lot of success, really great success working together on defense and offense too. And it certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now, and we'll be talking about that. Thank you very much for being here.
The world certainly is going crazy right now. So once the hearty handshakes were over, the two of them got to business. They spoke for about an hour. One of the things they discussed was NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a Western alliance, and it is worried because Donald Trump may pull the plug. He has criticized NATO members in the past, saying they don't pay their fair share. NATO guidelines are very clear. Every member should spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Most of them did not until recently, and Trump was not happy about this. And now that he's coming back, NATO countries have started paying up. This alliance has 32 members. In 2023, only 10 of these members paid their dues, or their due, 2% of their GDP on defense. This year, that number has gone up to 23. So 23 out of 32 NATO countries are now spending the requisite amount on their defense. Clearly, there's an improvement. Macron brought it up with Trump. And the response? NATO is good as long as they pay their bills. That's what Trump said. Probably not the reassurance that Macron was looking for, but it's better than nothing. After the bilateral, they were joined by a third participant, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Macron was initially supposed to meet Zelensky separately, but he decided to pull off a diplomatic coup. He staged the first meeting between Trump and Zelensky after Trump won the US election. The meeting did not last long, just about 20 minutes, but despite the brevity, Zelensky said it went well.
It was a very good meeting. It is important that it was constructive and the atmosphere was crucial.
Zelensky called the talks constructive. He called Trump resolute as always. And he said they would continue to work together. So he was trying to project hope. But then Donald Trump himself spoke, first about the Syrian crisis and then about Ukraine. Let me quote from what he said about the war in Ukraine. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin. Too many lives are being so needlessly wasted. Too many families destroyed, and if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. I know Vladimir well. This is his time to act. China can help. The world is waiting. So he urged Vladimir Putin to act now to bring about an immediate ceasefire and begin negotiations. What came next was even more interesting. As you heard, Trump said China can help. Not something that Zelensky and the West wanted to hear, because they accused China of being partisan, of supporting Russia in the war. They've sanctioned a number of Chinese firms for making weapons for Russia. And now Trump says China can help end the war. It's interesting also because of Trump's own position. He's no fan of China. He's preparing for a trade war with them. He's threatening tariffs on Chinese imports, and yet he wants Beijing to step in to help stop the Ukraine war. This might be a signal to Putin, an assurance that he won't be pressured by the West, that he may have a friendly face at the negotiating table. But will Putin accept this? Will he be more likely to play ball if China is involved? We'll probably find out in January after Trump takes office. Now let's turn our attention to the Caribbean, where Haiti has been rocked by gang violence again. This weekend there was a massacre in the capital city of Port-au-Prince. Nearly 200 people were slaughtered with machetes, knives and guns, all because of a priest who said voodoo was being practiced in a neighborhood. This incident has worsened Haiti's spiraling security crisis, which has left at least 5,000 people dead this year and displaced more than 700,000. But why is the Haitian government failing to control these violent gangs, and what will become of this crisis? Here's a report.
This is Wharf Jeremy, a sprawling slum in Haiti's capital city of Port-au-Prince. It's one of the poorest, most densely populated, and violent neighborhoods in the Caribbean nation. This weekend, it was rocked by a spike in gang violence. The massacre killed at least 184 people, and it was all thanks to a gang leader's personal vendetta. His name is Monel Felix. His son had a fatal illness, so Felix consulted a priest who blamed voodoo for the child's illness. Now, voodoo practices the belief that all living things have spirits. While it's largely misunderstood in Western pop culture, it's one of Haiti's official religions. But even though voodoo is a recognized faith here, it doesn't always have the best reputation. So, on Friday night, Felix set out to seek his supposed revenge against witchcraft, and the killings began. His gang killed at least 60 people in Wharf Jeremy. On Saturday, the child died from the illness. So, grieving or not, gang members paid the neighborhood another visit. They declared round 2. Using machetes and knives, they killed dozens of people. Most of the victims were over the age of 60. Older people who practiced voodoo were targeted and slaughtered. In some homes, 5 or 6 people were killed. Wharf Jeremy is a near impenetrable gang stronghold in the capital. The police generally don't go there, and law enforcement is severely lacking. So people from outside the neighborhood, like motorcycle and taxi drivers, intervened to save people, but they too were gunned down and killed. While mutilated bodies are still being burned in the streets, at least 184 people have been declared dead by the UN. But experts predict that the actual figure is much higher, pushing the overall death toll in Haiti's spiraling security crisis to at least 5,000.
The situation is getting much more critical. We've seen a growing number of internally displaced, now getting to over 700,000 in the country.
Haiti has been embroiled in gang violence since early this year, when rival gangs banded together and attacked government institutions, including police stations, prisons and hospitals. Since then, bloodshed has continued. Last month was particularly deadly for Haiti. 3 US airliners were struck by gunfire at the Port-au-Prince airport. The airport is still closed. Meanwhile, the government has been racked by political infighting, and the UN-backed police force, led by the Kenyan police, is severely under-resourced. So the government has struggled to contain the violent gangs whose power is only growing. And this weekend's massacre is a grim reminder that Haiti's problems are far from over.
Let's turn to Singapore now, which is hosting the ultimate contest in chess. 14 rounds of a grueling battle on the board. And the prize, the right to call themselves the World Chess Champion. It's a rare honor for players. Only 17 world champions have been crowned since 1886. An 18-year-old from India wants to be the 18th. His name is Gukesh D. He is locked in a tense battle with China's Ding Lizhen. Both players are tied after 12 games. If he wins, Gukesh will be the youngest world chess champion ever, also India's second after Vishwanathan Anand. But it takes a lot more than a sharp mind to reach that stage. It's about mental conditioning. It's about playing those mind games and sometimes even physical exercise. Gukesh has his own way of employing these tactics. Our next report tells you.
A small crowd has gathered at the Aquarius Hotel in Singapore, some of them in India's cricket jersey. But they're not shouting for Virat Kohli or Rohit Sharma, they're shouting for India's chess sensation. Gukesh D, an 18-year-old grandmaster from Chennai. He's on a quest to rewrite history in Singapore and to become the youngest ever world chess champion. His rival is China's Ding Liren. The 32-year-old became champion in 2023, but he arrived in Singapore low on confidence. Ding had gone 28 classical matches without a win, so Gukesh had reasons to be excited. The title match has 14 rounds. For each victory, you get 1 point. For each draw, you get 0.5 points. The first player to reach 7.5 is declared the winner. And what's the score right now? 6-6 at the end of round 12. So 2 rounds left and everything to play for. Ding Liren surprised Gukesh by winning the first round. The second round was drawn and Gukesh took the third. What followed was a string of 7 draws. Then on Sunday, Gukesh pulled ahead. He capitalized on a mistake by Ding to take the lead, but he couldn't hold on to it. Because today, Ding won the 12th round, once again levelling the score. It's truly a monumental tussle. There are 2 rounds left in the title match. If neither player crosses 7.5, we head to a tiebreak on Friday. Whoever wins that is world champion and gets to walk away with $2.5 million. At this point, it's not just about skills, it's also about composure, about mental fortitude and mind games. And we've seen a bit of that in Singapore. Before the first round, both players could select a playing chair. They were given 7 different options. Ding went for a simple office chair, but Gukesh chose this, an imposing gaming chair. Some experts weighed in on the choice. They said it reflected the mindset of both camps. Gukesh and Ding also had other demands. Both of them wanted to play outdoor sports on their rest days. Gukesh is admittedly a tennis fan. At a tournament in Baku last year, he played tennis on his rest day, though it's not clear if he did the same in Singapore. Gukesh's team also includes a mental conditioning coach named Paddy Upton. He says the young grandmaster has self-awareness way beyond his years. It tells you just what goes into becoming a chess champion. It's not just sharpness, but also physical and mental conditioning. Each player has his own style, and in Singapore, we are seeing 2 contrasting ones. Just consider round 1. Gukesh got up from his chair and moved around between moves. He spent 28 minutes away from the board. And Ding, he didn't move an inch. The champion spent 245 minutes at the board. All of this makes the clash in Singapore iconic. Gukesh chasing history, Ding Liren looking to consolidate. But only one will walk away as champion.
Outgoing US President Joe Biden said that the sudden collapse of the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad is a fundamental act of justice after decades of repression. Now, but it was also a moment of risk and uncertainty for the Middle East, is the statement that is coming in from Joe Biden. Let's listen into what exactly he had to say.
13 years of civil war in Syria, more than half a century of brutal authoritarian rule by Bashar al-Assad and his father before him. Rebel forces have forced Assad to resign his office and flee the country. We're not sure where he is, but there's word that he's in Moscow. At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks. These past few days have been historic. And, it's in the days ahead that will determine the future of this country. And we intend to approach them with strength, wisdom, and resolve. So thank you very much. God bless America, and God protect our troops. Thank you.
Akansha, we just heard the US President Joe Biden. Of course, he is outlining a multi-pronged approach when it comes to maintaining stability in Syria. But given the fact how the situation is right now, how much feasible is it to maintain stability and counter the ISIS that is there?
Right. Sherin, he's saying that first they will be engaging with Syrian groups, and that I think is going to be a very crucial point to begin with. He's also talked about how they, including within the process that's led by the United Nations to establish the transition. And perhaps you can expect the United States strike that sort of rapport.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In France, the Notre Dame Cathedral holds its first public mass since the deadly fire in 2019. A US-based company uses 5,000 drones to form a giant Santa Claus in a stunning Christmas display. And Guatemalans set the devil on fire to welcome the festive season. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1979, smallpox was officially eradicated. In 1967, the WHO undertook a worldwide effort to prevent any outbreaks. By the mid-1970s, smallpox was only present in the Horn of Africa and the Indian subcontinent. The last naturally occurring case was in Somalia in 1977. Smallpox is the only human disease that has been eradicated till date. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Et du Fils et du Saint-Esprit.
Laminates presents CNN News 18 Primetime Studio.
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narasimhan, coming to you live from the CNN News 18 Primetime Studio presented by Green Lamb Laminates. Days after BJP MP and spokesperson Dr. Sambit Patra called Congress MP and leader opposition Rahul Gandhi a traitor, citing a Mediapart report that came out with an eye-opening revelation on the Ouster